Greetings. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Eve, and today, this is my first, hopefully of many, interviews with a dear friend of mine. I'll introduce him in just a second, but I just want to introduce, since this is the first video on a new playlist titled The Mage Behind the Magick, I just want to give a couple of seconds to kind of say what my intentions with this are. So, the word occult, the word magic, especially the words witchcraft, they could have a lot of stigma, and there's been such devastating connotations that when people who don't know what these things are hear those titles, it could be jarring or it could be scary. People could get defensive. And by bringing on hopefully as many people from as many different backgrounds and traditions as possible, I would like to help humanize the word magic, the word witchcraft, the occult, and show by talking one on one with various people in various backgrounds to demonstrate to people who don't know what this is that it's actually a really beautiful, mind opening experience. It's very liberating, and it's not always all of that scary stuff that you've seen in Hollywood. It's not the stuff that the church put on us. There's been witch hunts, literally, and the Inquisition in France, and etc. So there's been a lot of really trying times for pagans of various types. So, my hopes of bringing people on is just to help free us from a lot of that stress that we deal with. Oh my god, what if my boss finds out that I practice magic and it could mean somebody's livelihood? Yeah, even today in the 2020s, that still happens. So, that being said, I hope you enjoy this and the future videos that are going to be coming up in this playlist. I have a couple of good interviews already lined up. So today is somebody very special to me. He is I guess you would say, former Golden Dawn member, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. He was with them for 18 and a half years before retiring from the order and moving from where he was born and raised, spent most of his life in LA, in California, the West Coast, USA. He moved to India, where he's now married, has a beautiful life and family out there, and he's been practicing Vajrayana and Mahayana Buddhism as well as traditional yoga. And in his own words, he wanted to get the real, authentic experience from people who were raised, not necessarily from people who are getting it through white culture. And yes, there are some dedicated, serious practitioners in the United States, but he wanted that more authentic Asian experience. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to VH Frater BT, also known as Edward Reib. Okay, so here we are today. This is a new segment that I'm doing on this channel. I'm Eve. Do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. And today I have a very special guest, and so let me introduce Edward Reib, VH Frater BT, Golden Dawn member, and now practicing yogi and Buddhist. Is that correct?
Hello. Yeah, basically, former Golden Dawn, I'd say. Although you could say that I'm the chief adept of my own order of one.
Sure thing, sure thing.
Yeah.
So, how long have you been in India now? Is it India, correct?
Yeah. I've been in India for almost 5 years. At
Five
the end
years.
of March, it'll be 5 years.
Okay. Yeah, so when I was thinking of bringing people on to do interviews, I wanted to
Mhm.
make sure that I asked you first.
Oh, thank you so
Not
much.
Yeah, not only to extend, you had me on your show, the Esoteric Nerd podcast.
Hmm.
I guess that was 2017, so about 5 years ago.
Hmm.
So not only to return the favor, but yeah, I mean, you're somebody that by doing that and the work that you've done, you're doing a great service to the world, spreading the message. So I wanted to make sure, I thought it'd be very interesting to see, having done so many interviews yourself with people in so many different traditions, to be on the other side of it. I thought that might
Yeah,
be
it's
fascinating.
always fun. Yeah, it's less work for me. So.
Yeah, there you go. How many episodes have you done interviews? Do you know? It's over 100.
Interviews. Well,
Yeah.
I'm on episode. I think I just did episode 126.
Okay.
Some of them aren't interviews, but yeah, like maybe I don't know, 6 or 7 of them are just me talking, or
Okay.
something I felt I wanted to share for one reason or another.
So about 120 at least. So
Yeah, at least, yeah.
Impressive, impressive. Um, so I guess I wanted to know on this segment, I mean, magic is very important, and I want to bring on people from as many different traditions, backgrounds as possible. Um, I guess for me personally, when it comes to magic, I think that I don't know how comfortable you are talking about yourself as opposed
All of
to
it.
yoga or
Yeah, no,
magic. Okay,
yeah, I
cool.
can talk about it.
Yeah, I like to know where people kind of came from, and I guess there's so many books already out there that tell us how to do all these rituals, how to summon this spirit, how to invoke this god, how to protect yourself, how to create this talisman. But there's not so much autobiographical material out
Mm,
there when it comes to
mm,
magicians. And so I kind of want
yeah.
to get to know magicians, like what happened what was the moment that you said, I need to go into the Golden Dawn? And then from there, what was the moment that you said, okay, this was it, and now I'm transitioning into yoga? Well, what were those moments like? I want to get to know the
Hey,
people behind the magic,
sure.
you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they weren't always moments, like exact
Sure.
moments. But basically for me, it had a lot to do with my dad and my dad passing away. He was not a member of any order, but he used to attend BOTA, Paul Foster Case's
Of
schism,
course.
back
Mm-hmm.
in the day, at the headquarters there in Eagle Rock, California, Eagle Rock, Los Angeles, and
Okay.
with his mom, like back in the 50s, and they were into
Okay.
UFOs. They were basically the cool West Coast Christian scientists as
Okay.
opposed to the like dogmatic East Coast. I mean, that's my general understanding. I've never been Christian Scientist, but back in the 50s, apparently that was what he observed. And
Okay.
growing up, it didn't seem strange for him and his mom to have an interest in Buddhism, Hinduism, Eastern philosophy in general, and tie it in to the teachings of Mary Baker Eddy. But then he went to Princeton, which is a Christian Scientist college over there in New Jersey, and
Sure.
uh, and they did not tolerate him. Like he was the black sheep of the college, basically, and he had
Okay.
sort of a little gang of occultists, Buddhist, magicians, and he would summon river spirits to visible manifestation over the river, and get in all kinds of trouble. They were always taking him in to heal him.
When you
So I
have
mean,
when you have a sort of light, you always attract
yeah,
people. They always
yeah,
come to
yeah.
you. You know, when you have something interesting and you know you're kind of immersed in some type of spiritual work, whether
Mm.
people know it or not, they kind of sense it and you
Yeah,
attract
yeah.
those type of, you know.
So I mean, I won't spend, the next half hour telling my dad's biography, but basically he dove into tarot, Hermeticism, and that was kind of his base. And then in around 1966, he met my friend Kes Fry, who I've interviewed, I think, 6 or 7 times on Esoteric Nerd podcast, and he's still going. He's, I don't know, 80 something now, but he's still
Amazing.
writing
Bless him.
books, and yeah, yeah. So I mean, if you ask Kes, he kind of got my dad into Vajrayana Buddhism, but I mean, it might
Okay.
have happened anyway. So for a while, and at the same time, there was an exchange where my dad introduced him to Hermeticism and Beyond Fortune and all this kind of stuff. And
Hmm.
so they both kind of had this shared language that would just go in and out of Buddhist, Vajrayana, Hindu concepts and Hermetic Kabbalah, Golden Dawn concepts, so they could talk
Hmm.
about Kali Yuga and Gebura in the same sentence, and nobody stopped to go, "Hey, that's an odd thing to say." So that was
Right.
kind of that I grew up basically with that, and
Okay.
then when I was 15, he passed away. And I felt like, because I had gone through those sort of early adolescent years of being rebellious, he wasn't a perfect man, he had a temper and everything. So, being a bit rebellious myself, and I pushed him away. And and then we kind of reconciled, like right at the end. He knew he was dying. And then, so I felt like I had missed out, like I should have learned from him. I should have like just taken notes and said, because I knew that I could always pick up the phone and call him and say, hey, Dad, I had this weird dream last night. Or, hey, someone gave me this statue. It looks like the Buddha, but I'm not sure. He has a pointy hat. And so he was always there as my guru, for lack of a better word. I mean, that's not a bad word in India. In America, it's, you know, people go guru, that's, you know, but here it just means teacher. It's a respect thing. And so anyway, without a guru, my mom had learned from him back when they were together. They had split up when I was very young, but she remembered what he would say. And she knew that he had started out on a Hermetic Kabbalah path and had transitioned over to a more Vajrayana Buddhist Eastern-oriented path. So I said, okay, what I'm going to do then is start on a Hermetic Kabbalah path, and then later in life transition to an Eastern Vajrayana path. And
so you had a plan since you were
yeah,
almost a very young
15.
age. That,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
And so before he really got into Hermeticism, he called himself a neo-Druid. I don't even know. Yeah, I don't think he was into Gardner or anything, but he was studying whatever there was available to study about the Druids and, you know, and the Celts. I think generally speaking, he wrote a lot of poetry, so I can kind of infer that he identified with the Celts as the oppressed people, you know, as opposed to the Romans, who were the oppressors. So he was identifying, at least at that age, with a particular kind of moment in history. So because, of course, a lot of our ancestors were either English, Irish, Scottish, or Welsh.
I was going to ask. Okay,
yeah, there's also some German, French, you know, Dutch, French, and a little bit of Cherokee, apparently. Early American settlers, they always ended up with some Cherokee in there. But so anyway, so I think, I mean, when I psychoanalyze, you know, it's easy for one to think, you know, gosh, I can't believe I'm part British, those fucking redcoats and their bastard empire, you know. But I interpreted that as that he was getting back behind that and saying the bastard empire thing was a bad habit that they picked up from the Romans. But underneath that, if you get back to their forefathers, they were the Celts that were being oppressed by the redcoats who were wearing red and gold, you know, at that time, almost 2,000 years ago, or about 2,000 years ago. And,
there's that movie. There's the movie Train Spotting.
Do
you remember
I
that?
should see that. I haven't seen that, but I know it's an important one in the pop culture collective.
I mean, long story short, a bunch of I want to say they're Irish or Scottish. I'm not exactly sure. Forgive me on that one. But there's one line in the movie, and it's about like they get into hard drugs, and I'm not bringing it up for that reason. But there's one line where they're talking about the British, and they're like, I can't believe that we got colonized by these bloody wankers. Of all the people to be colonized by, had to be these people.
Yeah.
Just kind of thought that was funny.
Yeah. There's another, I'm trying to remember the name of, there was the queen of, you know, she was a warrior, very heroic historical person. And then they made a movie about her, starts with a B. Maybe somebody watching this is like, oh, so comment below, would you? And I'll send it to you afterward. I'll look it up. But so yeah, and a friend of mine, he had some ancestors that they were like, you know, early Christian communists. I mean, pre-Marxist. So it hadn't gotten that atheist, you know, tincture yet. So they were interpreting the gospel of Yeshua as a communist thing, basically, or what later became called. So they would throw dirt and rocks at the nobility as they passed by and stuff like that. So anyway, So yeah, it's a fun story. But anyway, so my dad was writing that kind of poetry. So the first thing I did was become Wiccan. So before joining the Golden Dawn or doing anything like that, I joined the Druidic Craft of the Wise of America. And I went through 2 years of training on Fridays and wrote some sabbats and did all that good stuff. My mom joined, she didn't want to just send me off as a teenager to go on this journey into the land of weirdos by myself. So she came along and she became active, in it all too. And so we did 2 years of that. And then somewhere in the second year, we found a flyer for basically what was selling itself to be the one true and holy Golden Dawn that was founded in 1888, And of course, it turns out that it was one of several groups that were claiming to be that.
Happens in every, I don't want to say religion, but it happens in every present day occult,
especially where there's secrecy, like the early Rosicrucians, like who can say which of the 18th century 1700s groups that claimed to be Rosicrucian were the real ones. It's impossible without a time machine to really
AM
to
or
know.
C or SRIA or whatever.
Yeah. And so anyway, we joined thinking that it was the real thing. And I mean, it's not that it wasn't the real thing. It's like the leadership was odd, and I don't want to dwell on that too much. I mean, I can talk about it, but that'd be a whole other conversation, like what was wrong with the leader and all the bad things he did and everything. But I mean, the way that it was organized, we didn't even know who the leader was for the first 3 or 4 months that we were involved. Because
it was like a secret chief type person behind.
I mean, yeah, they were playing with that sort of mysteriousness, I think. But I think it was also kind of like there was enough people in the higher grades, and they knew that he was like someone that you should keep the neophytes away from, because he'll scare them away or he'll do something inappropriate, or you know what I mean? And so there were people wearing white that were like, yes, we're the adepts, and we'll teach you. And we had a local one who went on to become a Episcopal archbishop. But anyway, I won't name him because, he doesn't want it. But I did interview him, and he's on the Esoteric Nerd as VH Frater AKHV. When he first came on, he used his real name, and then he asked me to take it down, and I negotiated and said, what if I leave your name out of it? And he's like, okay. So anyway, so that's fun. But anyway, so he was my teacher, and he was a younger guy. I was, like I said, by then I was 16, and he was probably 27. And so he was an actor, it was Burbank, Hollywood. And so yeah, I mean, there was other teachers too. But yeah, the moment was basically my mom found a flyer, and she was saying, yeah, your dad always talked about the Golden Dawn. He said avoid Crowley, but he said that the Golden Dawn was a good source because, Dion Fortune, Paul Foster Case, he liked all this. And then there was some history between my dad and Pope Runyon. They were friends going back to the 70s. And there was some stories that I heard from my mom that were secondhand stories that later I talked to Pope Runyon 30 years later and got some clarification about, for example, I always thought that he was hardcore into Crowley, but my dad was saying, no, Golden Dawn is better. But then it turns out that Pope Runyon, when he started out, he was hardcore into Crowley, but then he started to decide that, for one thing, Golden Dawn, he preferred Golden Dawn, and he was going to write his own system, the Ordo Templi Astarte, which is sort of kind of inspired by what Crowley did, but taking the source material from the Golden Dawn and making his own system, So anyway, based on Pope Runyon's advice to my dad. My dad had said that Golden Dawn. So anyway, long story short, I thought I was like joining the Golden Dawn, and that I was going to grow into, like, I was thinking I was like Simba in the Lion King, and Poke Runyon was like Scar, and I don't know why. Like, I mean, I can explain that again. That's like there's too many stories that if I launch into one of them, I'll be talking about that this whole time. And I've talked about it on Esoteric Nerd, but basically, I had this idea in my head that Poke Runyon was very bad, and that I needed to become this holy magician,
Kind
and
of
pure,
avenge your
yeah,
legacy.
or something, or take
Yeah.
back the occult, claim leadership of the occult community in Los Angeles,
Mhm.
for the next generation, and save all these wayward souls that were in Pope Runyon's group, or something. I was a teenager, and I had
Sure.
weird ideas. And so anyway, but the moment was basically we went to the orientation, and my mom asked a lot of questions. My only question was, do you teach astral projection? Because that was my main interest at the time. And they said yes. In the Theoricus grade, we get into a lot of astral projection, and there's a lot of astral work from that point on. And I was like, okay, I'm interested. And so then my mom asked a bunch of questions, and afterwards she came outside and said, this will be a good place for you to continue your magical training. And I said, okay. And that was basically the moment. And then our Druidic Craft of the Wise of America had a spy that was hanging around that shop, and they recognized my mom and I from one of the circles that the witches had. And so we ended up getting an ultimatum after 2 years of training in the Druid order that okay, you can be initiated. We're ready to initiate you. All you have to do is leave the Golden Dawn. And
Yeah.
and it
There's
wasn't
some hangups there.
it wasn't
Even
exactly because of the system, it was because of the leader. It was the leader had done something awful to one of the members of the DCWA. So
I see.
yeah, so
I
it wasn't exactly a religious feud, but more of a personality thing.
I won't name names here on New York, but there's when I first came into Hermetic, Alembic occultism, I guess I'm talking 2014-ish. I went to one of the witch bookstores in Manhattan, and I went over to the Golden Dawn slash Crowley section. They had some Israel Regardie, some other Golden Dawn authors, and then they had a couple of Crowley books. And as soon as I went to that section, they were, "Oh, hi, how you doing?" behind the counter when I came in. But as soon as I went to that section, it was like shooting daggers at me. And I kind of noticed that and internalized it a little bit. So there's always some type of
Mm,
animosity from not everybody, but from some individuals. Um,
yeah,
I have one question though.
yeah.
On well, it's kind of a big, deep one, but I'll say it nonchalantly. But do you ascribe to karma and reincarnation?
Well, I'm a student of karma. I mean, in other words, I learned what my dad had to say about karma, which was largely based in, sort of the Hollywood white people version of Vajrayana Buddhism. And then I was open to the clarifications and corrections of the Malibu white people who taught yoga in California. And eventually that's kind of why I came here, is I got tired of learning my Eastern philosophy from kind of my own distant cousins. With
Right.
all respect to them. I mean, they're
Yeah.
probably the closest thing to being me, that, you know what I mean? Like other people from a European background who have strong interest in Indian and Chinese and Tibetan spiritual practices and philosophy. They're me, basically. But
I mean, here in the
I
US, there when
yeah,
you say yoga to the average person, they think of a studio where
stretches.
everybody's on a mat
Yeah,
stretching, and it's like,
yeah,
well, that's one small part of yoga, but they
yeah,
don't
yeah.
understand what
It's
yoga
one
means.
eighth of yoga. Yeah,
Right, and it's
um,
a specific type. That's
yeah,
either Raja yoga or The word's slipping my mind at the moment when I need it most.
Right.
The other branch.
Yeah, well, there's within Raja Yoga and basically old school yoga, 2,200 years ago, when Patanjali, I'll get back to your question, by the way. Don't let me forget karma and reincarnation. When Patanjali was speaking, and somebody wrote down what he said, and it became the Yoga Sutras. He only, if I'm not mistaken, he only said sit comfortably. That was his only reference to a physical posture, and he might have said lotus position. Correct me if I'm wrong. Comment below. But yeah, and then the whole hatha yoga or
Hatha yoga. That was what I was trying to think.
That came later. The hatha yoga Pradipika got in the bookshelf here somewhere, and it's. That was more of a 1500s thing, though it might have been going on before that. So it was 500 years ago that they developed the 28 poses, if I'm not mistaken, and not all of them are still in use. But that had developed as a watering down of the tantric movement or aspects of the tantric movement. Like, for example, rather than laying on a corpse, they would lay flat on their back and call it corpse pose in reference to the old practice of laying on a corpse. So, there's like some interesting tie-ins, I don't know how to conjugate that, but with that. But yeah, so to get back to the question, karma is like, the Sanskrit word karma is equivalent to the Hebrew word asaya. So, so I believe in asaya to a certain degree. I mean,
I never heard that it's equivalent to asaya. I'm interested.
Yeah, they both mean action. Karma phala is the fruits of action. So when you do something and then it has a result, the result is the karma phala. But the very, very simplified version that people banter around in places like US is that what you do comes back to you. And that's turns out it's not exactly it. I mean, what you do weighs on you. And then you kind of attract, law of attraction isn't exactly a Hindu philosophy, but there's some overlap, I think. So the idea and the way that my teacher, Santosh at Yoga Darshanam studio in Mysore, give a little drop, down in Mysuru, I should say, the pre-colonized name. He had put it, and he probably got it from somewhere, but that if you, for whatever reason, you have to shoot an arrow, like at somebody, maybe to defend your family, whatever, and you release the arrow, that if you are attached to the result, that's where the karma is. But if you do the action and release the arrow, but you're not attached to the results and you don't put an intention into it, whether it be, glee at killing someone or, anger at them for threatening you or anything like that, then there's no karma involved.
Yeah, so, if you just do for the sake of doing out of necessity because this is where you are at that moment.
Right. Yeah. So if you live, it sounds like the opposite of good advice, but if you live without intention, context, in a certain context, obviously, it's when people say live in the now, someone can make a cartoon out of that and say, well, then you'll never plan for the future, you'll starve. No, obviously we have memory and we have awareness that there is a future, but that doesn't mean we have to live in it. We can be in present time and act, do what's right without being like, now give me points for doing what's right. For example, in the New Testament, I think there was a reference at one point to people coming in and dropping coins into the donation box, that they had coated the inside of the donation box with metal so that it would make a loud sound, so that people who were, in the temple praying would like be jolted out of their prayers and look over to see who just gave the donation for the poor. So it's kind of like, I mean, maybe I'm misremembering that. I don't know. But I heard that from somebody. I didn't read that. But yeah, so if you're doing a good act, then that's fine. But if you're doing a good act and you're attached to it, it's a gold chain, but it's still a chain. So in other words, there's good karma, there's bad karma, there's the iron chain or the lead chain, and then there's the golden chain, but they're both chains. And so the idea is to become free from chains. And in, for example, yoga or Buddhism or Jainism or Ajivika or a number of other traditions, you want to, you can put it several different ways. Break the chains or transcend or whatever. You want to get rid of the karma. You want to have no karma, good or bad. And where what kind of one notch, I want to say down, but maybe that's not a good way of looking at it. But like another more Veda-based, older, not older, but like a different way of looking at it is you want to do good things, have good karma, have more good karma than bad karma, then you'll be reincarnated into a higher caste.
Yeah.
Which I guess is the level of do good and good comes back to you.
I asked because I don't know how many worldwide there are occult practitioners. I mean, there's probably more Wiccans now than there are Hermetic practitioners, I would think. Wicca's kind of blown up over the past couple of decades. But 70s, 80s, it was much smaller, especially like Satanic Panic, and things were more either Christian or Jewish or Islam in this part of the world over here, the Americas. So when I hear stories of when I hear stories of people growing up in a very occult spiritual family, I often wonder like, wow, there was some type of either maybe work being done in a previous life that has to be continued because you got pushed right into it from birth practically.
Yeah, that's true. I'm not sure exactly where I was before. I have some things that might be memories, but they might have been tapping into the Akashic record and downloading somebody else's life experience. I'm not 100% sure, but none of the memories that I have, would in my mind seem to warrant, that kind of luck or that kind of thing. But yeah, I'm open to the idea for sure. It's an interesting idea.
Yeah, when it comes to that type of stuff, I think like you just demonstrated some type of healthy discernment and just, hey, I always keep myself open to the possibility. Maybe it's just my imagination when I have a vision or, unless it's so uncanny that like there's no, that moment that shakes you or something, one of those
That's true.
experiences.
Yeah. There are some of those in life. But I think that it's sort of like the boy that cried wolf in a way, that like if every thought that pops into your head is so profound that you have to get everybody to believe you, then you're going to miss the actual miracles.
Right. Then it's
like
definitely an ego thing and attention.
Like we had a loved one, a family member on her side that passed away, and his wife and his daughter and son, I think it was, were, just 2 days after he passed away, they were talking about him and mourning. And then in the next room down the hall, the light switch went click and the lights came on. So it wasn't that a fuse turned back on. It wasn't that and then they went and tested it, because they wanted to know if maybe like somehow the switch was halfway and then, just by, but no, there's no half position. It's either on or it's off. And my first thought was that must have taken him a lot of energy and focus to switch
Right.
that light on, just to
To do
let you
something
guys know
physically
that
like
he was there, you know.
yeah,
And it
yeah,
like gave me chills. Like those are
yeah,
the moments, those are the whoa, you know,
right.
like wow, you know, there's something here. But yeah, dreams and you know, like
Mhm.
synchronicity, it depends on how powerful. Sometimes a synchronicity is just too eerie, you know.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
had one the other day where just out of the blue, when I was doing my Buddhist books recital, I decided to include this statue. And I had only done that one other time, like 3 months ago. And then it
Mhm.
turned out that the scripture I was reading tied into the scripture that I had read that day 3 months ago, the last time she was there. And I'm like, that's one of
And it was
those.
just like instinct that told you to bring it out.
Yeah, yeah. So
Wow.
I mean, it was a synchronicity, but it's kind of on the level of the synchronicities that I've come to take for granted.
Sure,
There's
sure,
a certain
sure.
amount of synchronicity, and it doesn't mean it's not magic. It is
Right,
magic. It
right.
just doesn't make me go, "Oh my God," like it used to when I was, I don't
Hmm.
know, when I was very young.
I, I'll mention this just in passing. It relates to
Mhm.
what you had just said, and then I have a question after.
Sure.
But I just wanted to share with you. I also kind of came into Thelema and Hermetic occultism through Wicca.
Mm.
And one of the people that were in that group um, claimed to be a druid. Um, that their family, they were from the Celtic background, but he grew up in Australia, and so his family was from Australia. They kind of got sent there from the UK.
Right.
I think like a great grandfather, great great grandfather was had a criminal charge or something, and it was either long time in prison or you're going to Australia. And so the
Right.
family kind of just moved there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they kept whatever druid practice background that they had, and so they gave him oral teachings. So he was part of the Wiccan group because there was nothing else like that where we were upstate New York. But so I had a similar experience. The main person that was running the Wiccan group was also a Delamite. They kind of gave me Thelema when I was asking a lot of questions.
Mm,
So
mm.
thank goodness for a Wicca. It's kind of a backdoor
Yeah.
for a lot of people into
Yeah,
the
it's
medicine
true.
world.
Yeah.
Um, and then my next question. So how long did you stay in the Golden Dawn active for?
18 and a half years.
18 and a half years you were
Yeah.
participating.
Yeah, and it was a high demand cult.
Mhm.
So I mean, when you're local, for the people they, you know, we had astral initiation. There's a controversial
Mhm.
topic, but
Mhm.
so people who were initiated astrally, who were in, say, you know, another state that was too far away to attend physical
Yeah.
meetings, they could go up through at least all the grades of the outer, and you know, kind of put in as much, I mean, I won't say minimal effort because that's just that might come off as disrespectful to them.
Mhm.
Many of them put in a lot of effort and
Mhm.
did even more work than I did when it comes to certain things. But it was possible to just kind of pass the tests and
Mhm.
check in with your proctor or your mentor or whatever every so often, and get up through the grades. But if you're a local member to the temple, especially that particular temple in Southern California, then you kind
Mhm.
of people were had their eye on you, and you had to kind of prove yourself, you know, especially getting up into the second order. So I was in the outer order. I think probably most of your viewers are familiar with the grade structure.
I
Outer,
would think so. Yeah,
yes,
from Malkuth up to Tiferet is
right,
first order. As soon as you hit Tiferet, you begin the Adept second order, and then above the
exactly.
Adepts is third order.
Yeah, yeah. They had like a bit of nuance where the first order was considered up to Venus, and then Portal, the spirit grade in between Venus and Sun, Netzach and Tiferet, was considered like neither outer nor inner. So it was, you were literally in the portal. You were
Yeah, you're in the
neither,
reflection
you're
of
not
the
in that
abyss,
room, not in that room. Yeah.
the
So
veil of Parokath.
exactly, yeah. And
Mhm.
so I went from neophyte to portal in 6 years, 1993, was it 1994? So that would make it 5 years, from 1994 to 1999. And then I was in Portal for 1999. And that was a good year. Oh my gosh. I was living with a dear mentor. He was my student in the order, technically, but he was born in 1938 and had traveled the world and spent a bunch of time in North Africa, and had been an active Zen Buddhist studying with Suzuki in San Francisco. He had become a Scientology auditor and then left and been harassed by them. So you can guess who was really teaching who. He was definitely my teacher. If he had a question about Golden Dawn, I'd answer, but he was the teacher if there was one. And
correct me if I'm wrong. I remember the last time when I came on your podcast, you had said that I don't know at what point in the Golden Dawn, but that you were never really reading the literature, but you were there so often that you were able to quote the books just from talking to people, that you absorbed all the
yeah,
information like osmosis.
yeah.
I remember you
What
saying
what
that.
what kind of happened? I mean, there were two sides to that. One was when I was, 16, 17, there were issues where someone would read 50 books about
Mm,
Golden Dawn and occult and then become a neophyte and then be like contradicting and questioning and like correcting the teacher all
mhm,
the time. So they were trying to like encourage people to like focus on the grade material they were given, and
okay.
and like not read published material. And I
Mm,
was sort of, I don't know, I was obedient when it came to what my teachers told me when I was a teenager. I was
yeah,
following the advice of the guru or the
yeah,
gurus. And so even if we had Rigardi's book, there were certain pages that personally were untouchable to me.
yeah,
Like if I'd be very careful and kind of like, there's a hexagram, I'm not supposed to see that.
mm,
Um, and so in order to get a part of it is like in order to get as close as possible to the experience that the original initiates had, because they
yeah.
couldn't go, they had a good library, the British library, but there were no Golden Dawn books there.
Right, right,
And
right.
so I wanted to get, as they say, the authentic experience.
Yeah.
So there was that side of it, where we were encouraged in the cult to not read outside sources. Now that was something that was said at a class I attended sometime in the 1990s. It wasn't like standard policy that now that you're a
Mhm.
part of us, don't read the outside things.
Right, right.
Sometimes in the early days of the internet, people would be told, best to stay away from the alt groups, because that was where the ex-members would go and spill all the dirty laundry
Mm,
about.
mm.
And so anyway, so then later, I had some personal drama issues involving, relationships and the leader of the group. So that
Was
was
he
that.
the same person as when you first came into that group?
Yeah,
That old?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he was the person who started it all, and
Okay.
he would say things like, "This isn't a democracy; it's a hierarchy. I'm the leader. If I say we're doing this, then you can either get out or go along with it." He was very
Sort of
autocratic.
fascist,
Yeah,
tyrannical. Yeah.
exactly. And the structure of it, though there's supposed to be a balance of power between the three chiefs, someone
Right.
can easily tweak that a little bit and just, have the three chiefs be people that you appoint to enforce your,
Mm,
will. And if
yeah.
one of the three chiefs starts to get, their own ideas, against yours, then you can just
Replace them.
kick. Exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
so that's
Flying
that's a
monkey type of
bad
situation.
that's a bad way of doing it, I think. I think it's better, maybe I'm biased being American, but I think it's better when the three chiefs actually operate as a balance of power.
Yeah,
But
I would
even
feel the
then,
same way. Yeah.
even then you can still get three people on the same page about let's be assholes together, so like,
Yeah, people are
I don't
people,
know.
you know?
People are people. It's hard when it comes to actual organizations of people.
Yeah.
There can be such good that comes from the shared experience of a magical order, and
Right.
such tragic bad as well.
I've had
And
I was so
usually both.
I have two similar experiences just to share with you.
Yeah, yeah,
I when I was in OTO, I didn't there's published material. I have it behind me.
sure.
There's several books. There's OTO Rituals and Sex Magic, Amor Divino, published by Hellfire Club. It has their ninth degree, 10th degree, and eighth degree papers. There's a book by Francis King that he put out with every OTO initiation. But when I was in there, I made sure I know that those books are there, but I'm not gonna ruin my experience. I had just respect for the
Right.
system.
Hmm.
Like I don't want to ruin them. Um,
Yeah.
when I left OTO, it was a different matter. I had already permanently resigned, so I said, well, if there's anything of value that could help me spiritually, I am going to read them since they're out there. But at the time, I didn't want to do that. Also, you
Yeah.
mentioned just really quick astral initiations. Um,
Right.
if you've got people that really know how to project an astral temple, it works. I mean, my teacher was in Oregon and I was in Brooklyn, New York, and we had gotten to the point where we had never met in person, but we would talk on the phone many hours a day. He had cancer. He was dying when I met him.
Mm.
So every minute was precious. He was alive for 15 months before he passed away. So I knew him just over a year. We got to work together. So we did as much as we could in that year in a couple months. But it got to the point where we were able to describe each other's room. And I had never
Mm.
been in his home. He'd never been in mine. But he would ask, hey, what's that box on the floor in the corner? I was walking there and standing there, but then I looked down and I saw I'm standing in a box. It has a gray top. The bottom is black. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's an extra storage chest that I have right there.
Mm.
Oh, you're wearing a brown robe today. Yes, he was wearing a brown robe. Like it got to that point where
Yeah.
we were
Yeah.
doing these initiatory experiences cross country, so,
Mm.
but again, it depends on the people experiencing it, whether it works for them or
Right.
not.
Yeah. So just to finish the thought, by
Yep.
2002, there were two things happening. One was that, I mean, the inner order was kind of like in its own world.
Hmm.
We were going to save the world. We had been chosen. We were the chosen, people, if you will, that were we had been anointed by God to
Hmm.
end war and establish world peace and end world hunger and establish, some kind of economic system that works for everybody. And
Hmm.
so there was that side of things, plus there was like the gross feeling in my stomach that was left from all the personal issues that I had in the order with the
Hmm.
leadership.
Yeah.
So when I went to a bookstore, the last place I would want to go was the magic section.
Why
By
is that?
2002, those two
What?
reasons. One was that we weren't like we were in the second order, so we were done with all that Golden Dawn stuff. We knew it all, we mastered it all, and when we wrote our
Yes.
rituals, we used it. We took pieces from here and there to put it together and create something sort of messianic but Catholic and New Age, and we had our own current.
Hmm.
And so we would get instructions from the leadership, and they were supposedly getting instructions from the third,
Okay.
the divine beings that were guiding us,
Yes.
and all this. And so I wasn't interested, and I wasn't interested for two separate reasons. I wasn't interested in what like Donald Tyson has to say, you know what I mean, or Chick
Hmm.
Cicero or anybody
Yeah.
else, like because they were kind of doing something else. Like, I mean, they were doing Golden Dawn. I can do
Yeah.
Golden Dawn. I've been Hierophant many times, like it was sort
Sure.
of an arrogant position, like
Okay.
like like I guess, it's like I'm a teacher. I don't need to read this kindergarten, textbook. So there's that level of it. And,
Mm-hmm.
this is, I'm talking about myself over 20 years ago. So I'm
20,
kind
yeah,
of like
okay.
being critical of my younger self. But then also on a personal level, I didn't want to be reminded, like it was bad enough that I had to be at the temple like 6 times a week and all day on Sunday and run the rituals on Saturday and do the classes on Wednesday and Monday. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so if it was me time and I was at the bookstore,
Yeah,
I was going to the sci-fi section.
I understand
Um,
now.
so
Yeah.
yeah, so that's why I never read any of the books. Is so at once, because when I was a teenager student, they said don't read the books, and when I was a teacher and an adult and old enough to decide whether I wanted to read the books, I didn't want to read the books.
The occult, it can be like, myself
Exhausting.
included, it
Yeah,
could be exhausting, and you get so
yeah,
immersed in it that
yeah.
I don't know if you ever had the experience. It could sometimes be hard to relate to mundane people when they
Oh
bring up a
yeah.
topic,
Oh
like,
yeah. Oh, and
and it's like,
I didn't understand them. I mean, I lived at the temple for a while, and I wanted to not become completely estranged from real
mm,
people. Like there was a period where I was unemployed between, birth and about 2004. So like, 2003-ish, around there. Once I was working, then I started to get work friends. And then I started to have that kind of corner of my life. But before I had that, I had my best friend from high school, and he was a bartender. And
mhm,
so when the rituals were finished, I would go to whatever bar he was working at. And,
mhm,
of course, it was like, you weren't supposed to drink, especially not after ritual work. But of course, like, I'd have a drink or two, at my friend's bar. And then
sure,
we'd hang out till 4:30 in the morning. And then I also had Gordon, the one I told you about, who was the older man that was technically my student, but in reality, he was my teacher. And I'd go over to his
right,
house and hang out. And, I wasn't supposed to reveal all the secrets of the order, but I would share pretty much everything with him, except for the things that I was, I guess you could say, a little embarrassed about. Like, because he was familiar, he knew Golden Dawn, and
hmm,
he knew Zen, and he kind of knew the language of Scientology. So even though he was not a fan of the organization, he
hmm,
knew the teachings backwards and forwards and was teaching me out
hmm,
of the tech dictionary and all this. And
hmm,
so he and I would have these great conversations about the universe, everything, magic, time, the past, people, human nature. But I didn't want
hmm,
to tell him that, part of me was buying into that we were on a messianic quest to end. You know what I mean? Like he wasn't into,
sure,
like he thought that body healing was like missing the point. He thought that like all this obsession with healing, like
hmm,
healing the sick, was just like he would call it a theta trap, because he was using L. Ron Hubbard's terminology.
hmm,
But like a misappropriation of spiritual current and energy, to
yeah,
have a needing bodies on the tone scale is a below death tone. So
hmm,
like that he thought of the body as basically a meat refrigerator, like it was something to keep the meat warm in order for the brain to work for a period of time, for the
hmm,
sake of the spirit.
hmm,
Like you
hmm,
are a spirit, like so
right.
this whole thing running around resurrecting bodies, needing bodies, healing bodies, he thought that that was like the equivalent of worshiping the false
Worshipping the flesh.
idols.
Oh, I
Yeah,
see.
yeah,
Yeah,
sort of.
well,
I
kind
mean,
of
he
like,
wasn't exactly coming from a Judeo-Christian standpoint, but I'm translating it like worshiping the golden calf or something, where like
yeah,
an
I see.
error, like a
Instead of worshiping the
miscalculation.
highest, giving the highest to the lowest, something
Yeah.
along those
So that
lines.
real healing, what that would look like is getting someone to come off of their obsession with body healing.
I see.
Yeah.
I understand, I mean, the need. I mean, we're people, we live in a society, and when you're on a spiritual path, and you get those moments of enlightenment and you're changing, and you could look back 10, 20 years and you see how you were back then and how the occult or whatever spirituality you're practicing changes you. You want
Yeah.
that for other people, you know, and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
there's a
That kind of thing.
need
Yeah.
to help society. And
Yeah.
Rosicrucianism, it stemmed from trying to enlighten society and bring it into
Yeah.
this, you know. So,
And
but then on
especially
the other
back
side,
then. Yeah.
people are stubborn as hell, and it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, a lot of the problems that our society makes, it's just problems that could have been avoided. We just
Right.
chose to do the right thing instead of being
Yeah.
motivated by greed or selfish, you know.
And to transition a little, it
Yeah.
was in like again, like I mentioned, there was a heavy Catholicism element in the inner order of the group I was with, and out of a sense of sort of peer pressure, I joined the Catholic Church as a 24
Mm,
year old, and
mm,
sang in the choir first. What I did was there was the leader was born and raised Catholic, and
mm.
he went through phases of his life, and I won't get into too much detail, partly out of
Yeah.
respect for him. I'll get into more detail after you're dead, asshole. Anyway, talking to him, not you.
Hey, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'll tell everybody everything you told me. But anyway, no. So at that point in his life, he was heavily Catholic, and so he was like on board with the, if you really, whatever. And but we had this other alpha character who was a platoon commander in the
Mm,
Marines, and he came back with, I had a vision, and
mm.
I'm becoming Greek Orthodox because fuck you, like they have just as much right to be considered the one true and holy apostolic Catholic Church as the fuckers in Rome, And so there
Sure.
was this sort of like thing between them where it was like, okay, you're right, but don't be such an asshole about it, and so
Sure.
so he was trying to he was like, hey, why don't you come to church with me? And so I went to a Greek Orthodox church in like somebody's house, it was
Mm,
like a house that had been converted into a church, and I was kind of blown away by this priest
mm.
that was just like, he was kind of in a rolling his eyes back trance, like chanting in Greek and with the incense everywhere. And it was just like magical, way more
I've
magical than any of the people
I,
posturing. Mhm.
I've never seen a Greek Orthodox mass, so I'm interested. I
It's
might
worth it.
actually check one
It's worth
out
it. Yeah,
just
yeah.
to have that experience.
My friend over at Gonzo Theology on YouTube, you
Mm.
can check that out. He used to do psilocybin Sundays where he'd take psilocybin mushrooms and go to a church denomination he'd never been to before. And
Oh, that's so cool.
one time he went to the big evangelical like Trinity Broadcasting one, and he stood up and started yelling at, I don't know the guy's name, I don't, like yelling at the main guy, the that main evangelist, and saying he was a worshiper of Mammon and all this stuff,
Oh my
and
God.
he got taken out by security, and then his friend acted like, I'm really sorry, we think that he's
Yeah.
possessed. We thought that if we took him here, it would help him, but I'm really sorry. Don't blame him, blame me. I'm the one who pressured him to come here. And then they were like, okay, you all just, go on home. So they didn't have to go to jail.
I did a working a couple years back with one of the Orisha from Santeria,
Mhm.
Elegua. I don't know if you're familiar with the
I know
Afro-Caribbean
some of them,
current.
but not that much with Alegua. I know Ocean
Yeah.
and,
So he's like a child figure, but because the the slayers, for lack of a better term, had to cover their African worships in Catholicism, or
Mhm.
else they ascribed saints to most of the Orisha. So Elegua is Saint Anthony. So I was
Oh,
working
okay.
with him. So I found a church of Saint Anthony, and I wanted to go and actually take a Eucharist. And I had already been
Mm.
practicing the occult for many years, but it was just part of my working with him. So I went to a Catholic mass, and the energy there felt so stagnant. And
Mm.
it's like the priest giving the what is it called? The gospel it was more like I have to do this as opposed to I want to do
Right.
this. It felt like
Yeah,
such a
yeah,
chore, and
yeah. Oh,
so I'd like
yeah,
to
I
see a
totally know what
Catholic
you mean.
mass, yeah, that
Yeah,
has that uplifting, good, energized feel, where
yeah.
everybody's really into it.
So around this time I saw this movie about the vision at Fatima, in which
Mm,
yeah, the Lady of Fatima,
mm,
presumably Mary, appeared to some young children in like 1912 Portugal and told them to pray for the conversion of the Russians. And so, of course, everybody assumes that means for them to be converted to Catholicism. And then a few years later, there was the Russian Revolution, and they go, it was Mary because she knew that the Russian Revolution was coming, and all this stuff. And so it turns out, so I learned a little bit. I learned that the Russian Orthodox Church, there, of course, like all the churches, they were in Russia and outside of Russia. But the ones that were in Russia, when they came head to head with the Bolshevik Revolution, a lot of them, a lot of the priests and archbishops and so on lost their lives, except for the ones that were willing to totally play ball with the new government. And so now, even now today, there's this tight relationship between even Putin's government and the Russian Orthodox Church in
yeah,
Russia. But there's the
yes,
Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia that's
yes,
separate. So
yeah.
the Russian
I
Orthodox
saw
Church in
something on the
Russia
news. Mm,
started sending letters to the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia saying you need to promote and adopt and espouse the Soviet values in your
right.
church to your people, sending these letters to Russian Orthodox churches in Canada and England and Australia and all these places. And they were like, no. So then they were kind of like orphans in
Mm,
the church universe.
mm,
And so I started thinking, if there is, because I knew that there were Greek Orthodox Catholic, like churches that look and sound and act just like Greek Orthodox churches, but their hierarchy goes up to the Pope instead of
mm,
to an archbishop in Athens or something. So I was curious, and I thought that if there is a Russian Orthodox church that is in communion with the Vatican,
mm.
that is the church that I will join, and I will serve as a reconciler between the cult leader and the platoon commander.
Mm.
In a spiritual sense, I'll be always trying to be the hegemon standing between the two pillars, right? So I found it, and it was St. Andrew in El Segundo near LAX, and I just walked in there, and people were like, "Hi, welcome. Who are you?" And I'm like, "I'm Edward."
Mm.
And one of them was like, "Can you sing?" And I was like, "Yeah." So I joined the choir. I sang in the choir tenor for 4 years, and then I kept bringing people. Like
Mm.
I'd bring these weird, odd sort of people. An Italian woman and a Pakistani girl, and like all, I just like, who are these people? Who are you? Like what's going on? But they'd all come in and very sincerely, like to do the ceremony, but none of them were Catholic, and
Interesting.
none of us would take the communion. We'd all just were
Okay.
there because we wanted to be in the church, and to
Yeah.
experience the incense and the ceremony and worship Yeshua. And we'd
Yeah.
call him Yeshua, and so the priest was like, what, and so
What
then
is going on
finally,
here? Yeah.
I started like in traditional, like in regular, Catholic, in regular Vatican Catholic, you go through RCIA, 9 months of school, you learn the 52 different types of faith, and all this stuff. But at St. Andrew, you take the priest out for fish dinner 3 or 4 times.
Interesting.
At this nice restaurant, down the street. But anyway, I'm making fun a little bit, but not, also not. It
Yeah.
was up to him basically. He was in charge. He was kind of the right hand man for Cardinal Mahoney. So he was the in charge of all the ecumenical gatherings. So when like he would say, you know, he would come in and say, I spent my weekend at an ashram, and the Swami understands the teachings of St. Paul a lot better than a lot of Christians do. You know, he had some very interesting kind of like from the side kind of perspectives. And so like for when the Gnostic church caught fire in Hollywood, I suggested that we pick up a collection for them, and he just didn't respond. You know, because we would take up collections for other denominations of Christian if they had a disaster. I'm like, oh, a Christian church, you know, the Gnostic one, they had a disaster. He just... and so he's a good guy. I like him, you know, but in the end, you know, so I joined, and I brought you know, and some people that started coming along with me that were also in that same position of, in order to please the cult leader, we all need to join either the Catholic Church, preferably the Catholic Church, because he's the one in charge, or one of the Orthodox churches. And so they were like, oh, you've got a way in, you've got a backdoor into the Catholic Church. All right, let's all go with BT, you know. And so we were all going out to dinner, and the priest said, how do you all know each other? And I said, okay. And everybody at the table just was like, oh no, he's going to tell him, you know. so I did, you know. I don't know how, I think I was telling a different story. Somehow I got sidetracked into this story, but it's kind of a fun.
This is fascinating. Story. So what was his response to a bunch of Golden Dawn and occult practitioners?
He was quiet for a while. And then he started talking. He picked up this, one of the gifts we gave him was this Orthodox icon of the cross with the lines, you know, the line at the top and the line at the bottom, and all this Greek writing and alpha and omega and all this stuff. So he just started talking about the symbolism and like the meaning and you know, the esoteric significance of this and that, and then kind of like changed the subject. But then later, at the homily, I think that might have been the word you were looking for, when the priest is talking, when he's not doing the ceremony, but just talking. He started quoting the neophyte initiation, or at least the Sefer Yetzirah, talking about an abyss of height, an abyss of depth, an abyss of the east, an abyss of the west, and kind of looking over toward us. And then later he was saying, we're doing they were selling these Russian and Ukrainian ornaments, eggs and things like that at this festival or this marketplace that they have once a month in El Segundo. And he was like, he looked over to us and he was like, so if you could think prosperity thoughts, if you could send some prosperity energy toward the church. And we're like, okay. So I mean, there was this sort of like covert, like we were bringing the esoteric back into the exoteric, and we were reconciling the rift that had been created in 1307. And
I've never seen a priest endorse magic so blatantly.
And then on October 13th of 2007, the 700-year anniversary of Friday, October 13th of 1307, the Golden Dawn group, you know, that was in that church went along with the priest and a few other members of the congregation down to San Diego to see the exhibit of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we were all standing together, esoteric and exoteric, shoulder to shoulder, looking at these documents that were far older than any of these petty Age of Pisces grudges. You know, and it just seemed really beautiful, you know, at the time. So what happened was I ended up in a relationship with someone who was Jewish, and it got a little awkward, where you know, she came and the priest was talking about, you know, the law came from Moses. And great grace and truth
kind
came
of putting
from
her
Jesus
on the
Christ,
spot,
you know. Like kind of always like looking toward her, making reference to the Old Testament or Moses, but and emphasizing it different way, like because it would usually be the law came from Moses, but grace and truth came from Jesus Christ. And so he was like changing it, like the law came from Moses, grace and truth came from Jesus Christ. I mean, he was doing his best I mean,
Yeah.
because there's sort of an inherent anti-Semitism in traditional Christianity.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
he was doing his best with his source material, being the ecumenical director for Southern California. So,
Correct me if I'm
but
wrong, but according to the Bible,
yeah,
I mean, it's the Jews that got Jesus killed, essentially.
well, I mean, there's different ways to read it. The later when they use the phrase the Jews in the not the Gospels, but in like the Acts and all this other stuff, it's unfortunate the way that that phrase is used, because I think that's where a lot of these folks that that's the only book they read kind of
Right.
get their sense that, well, of course I'm anti-Semitic. Um, but it was, I mean, for one thing, there's the house of Judah or
Mhm.
Judea, which is different from the other 11. And they were the one that people like Solomon and David and Jesus were part of. And so his whole like claim to specialness in the 3 out of the 4 gospels was that he was the direct lineal descendant of Judah. Um,
Right.
and but of course then, so that's kind of where that split occurs in people's mind, and it was encouraged, I think, in the early church with Constantine. And
Mhm.
oddly, it was this weird combination, because they in the early Gnostic, some of the early Gnostic texts, they were saying that the God of the Old Testament was evil. And I mean,
Mhm.
like you can read it and say, well, geez, he seems to be really mean and strict here, and the God of love
Right.
here, is this the same
Right.
God? And
Right.
the traditional church will say he is the same God, but he seems different because we changed.
Mm.
And because Jesus came, it allowed us to see, who God really is underneath, or something like that. But then there was this, like in early Christianity, in early like Constantinian Christianity, there were still Jewish Christians, and there were people who like then there were Gentile Christians, and there
Mhm.
were Gentile Christians that would marry Jewish Christians, and Gentile Christians that would marry non-Jewish Christians. And then after about 150 years or so, one of his descendants, another Constantine, one of Constantine's grandchildren, something like that, or it started to become in vogue to, say that you shouldn't intermarry between these two faiths and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And so the split between the two cultures was gradual, at least in Greece. I mean, obviously, there were Jewish people in Yemen and China and Africa and all of this.
Yeah.
And I mean, but just by virtue of how things went, there were people that just had never heard about Christianity. Um,
Mhm.
and then when someone came along, they're like, it just sort of sounds like, oh, another one of those random false prophets,
Mhm.
and so then, of course, people who were very, very intensely serious about their Christianity will hear that and think, you are speaking with the mouth of Satan, and so
Yeah.
it's just set up to be a bad situation,
Yeah, to create divisions.
especially with the
So,
layman. Like I think
yeah.
when it comes to the people who dedicate their life to prayer and meditation and studying scriptures, same here in India.
Mhm.
There's at least 250 million Muslims in India,
Mhm.
um, and when you have somebody who's like a Sufi master, or like an imam, like a very devout person who fasts and prays and does all,
Mhm.
and then you get them together with a Brahmin who is a sincere practitioner, or a pundit, or a yogi, or
Mhm.
or something like that, and they can talk all night. They can stay up all night having the most interesting, profound, deep conversations about the nature of the universe
Mhm.
and spirituality. But it's the laymen who go to
Yeah.
church 4 times a year, or whatever it is, who
Right.
believe in, what they think they're supposed to believe in, and then they square off and say, my religion is true and yours is false. My religion, and it's
Right. They
just
just don't understand the work because
like
all
like
these
uh
religions, it's all the same truth. It's just
exactly.
coded in a different language with different history. But these
Yeah,
concepts are all describing the same world, the same universe, the same deity that created the same thing, you know?
exactly,
We're all
exactly.
human, so if you go inside, my inside
Yeah.
is the same spirit inside as anybody else, so it
And
doesn't
you can even
matter what
find
faith,
people,
yeah.
followers of Thelema,
Mhm.
who will, you know, ridicule and spit on the idea of someone being a traditional Golden Dawn practitioner, and
I've
vice
seen it.
versa.
I've seen
And
it.
yet
Yep,
here we
I've seen
are
it. Right.
having this
Right.
conversation. So I think we're doing it right. You know, we're approaching these things correctly. And but just to finish my little story, and then we can get on to
Sure.
something else.
Sure.
So I kind of pulled away from the church, and there was one point where I sent this ceremony to the priest, and I thought, like, in my mind it was like bringing together elements of pagan and Jewish and Eastern elements, but it was all kind of focused on the cross. You know, it was focused on the essence, the message of Yeshua, and but without actually saying Yeshua, you know. And I thought he could appreciate it, and it was a ritual that was being performed. You know, I'm not going into too much detail, but it was basically atheists and Jewish people and New Agers. And so you know, having everybody come together in a sort of Christian light without them knowing it, you know. But he didn't like it, and he came up during the homily and was talking about harlots, spiritual harlots, and things like that, and that if you're going to call yourself a Christian, then
Yeah.
you accept Christ into your heart and no one else, you know. And he's looking right at me, and I'm like, this is the last time I'm ever going to be standing in this church, you know.
Yeah. The
And
ritual
so
that you were describing, was it Yahshua as Jesus the person, or was it like the five elements?
tetragrammaton, more like,
Okay.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was more like kind of the essence of you know, it was sort of a golden dawny, like
Mm.
Isis was involved, and but it was Isis
Mm.
as Shekinah, representing the
Yeah.
mother of God, and
Yeah.
you know, like wink, wink, you know, like
Yeah.
no, anybody
Yeah.
crickets, you know. And so anyway, and so I, you know, he and I are still in touch. I wrote to him, and because I asked him for a document, you know, saying, and a, you know, official document, because when we got married, we got Priel and I got married at in a Hindu temple, but she wanted
How
to have a
long ago was
Christian
this?
wedding. This was 3 years ago.
I
Actually,
didn't
our
know. I didn't know.
anniversary is coming up.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Our
It's three
anniversaries come
years.
up
Congrats.
in less than a week. We're going down to Goa to celebrate.
Okay.
It's like a tropical, very beautiful down there. But
That's
she she
awesome.
grew, she grew up in like a traditional kind of Indian you know, world, and family and extended family, but she would see like weddings on TV and
Mm-hmm.
churches. And
Mm-hmm.
so she wanted to have like a church wedding. So we went
Mm-hmm.
to a Catholic church, and I said, hi, my name's Edward. I'm Catholic. I'd like to have a church wedding. And they're like, where's your documentation?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are you talking about? And so that time came and went. What ended up happening, just kind of a fun thing,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'll backtrack a little bit too, because you were asking me hours ago about leaving Golden Dawn and changing paths, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. But
Mm-hmm.
so what we did was we went into a Catholic church like 15 minutes before the mass was going to start, and said, you know, hey, we were wondering if you could. We just got married. If you could bless us, and we want to do a ring exchange. We just want to like say our vows and exchange rings. And so he was saying, okay, and he blessed us with holy water and said, may God bless you, you know, and everything. And he's like, you can go outside by the shrine. There's a Mary shrine outside the church, and you can do your ring exchange there. And we were like, okay. And I was like, hey, come here. And so we went up to the front of the church, where they had, you know, the half full of people sitting there facing us, you know. And she, by the way, was in a wedding dress that we had rented, and I was in a rented, like, sort of faux tuxedo, you know. And we got up there, and you know, we had our sort of our cadre, you know, with us, our people that were taking our pictures and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And and so there was like cameras, people cameras, and then we're up there. There's the crucifix. We're at the altar, and I turn to her and I take out my little piece of paper and I say, "I thee wed," or the most traditional possible wedding vows, and we exchanged rings. Here's my ring, and
Nice.
yeah, it's nice, and. And then, and so then, I put the ring on her, she put the ring on me, and we kissed, and people were taking pictures. And then the priest came up and like shoot us away like we were dogs.
Oh no.
So that was in southern India. So we had like a full-on, bona fide, really beautiful Hindu ceremony, though. But they wouldn't fill out any paperwork because I wasn't Hindu. But they were willing to do the ceremony because her best friend that she calls sister, and like her family kind of considers her family, it's their temple. You know what I mean? It's like they don't own the temple, but they're active there, and so they talk.
So it was like the full religious ceremony of marriage, but without the legal binding through the Hindu.
Yeah. So a year later, so I just kind of like, we were lazy. I just kept renewing my tourist visa, and then figured, because people do that. People live in India, and then every 6 months, all you have to do is every 6 months you go to Nepal for a week, and then you renew your visa and come back. Even if you're on a 10-year visa, you have to leave every 6 months, and so you have to leave the country and come back. So Nepal's right next door. You just go to Nepal and come back. And so I was
you can do this indefinitely, or
basically, yeah. But awesome. not if there's a worldwide pandemic.
Oh wow!
So that happened, and foreigners were being encouraged to go back home, but it was at that time India had very few cases. And places like Germany and US and they had very many cases. So there were a lot of people saying, "Can we stay here?" And the Indian government was nice enough to say, "Okay." And so they kept extending, the tourist visas for the foreigners that wanted to stay here. I think there was 20,000 Americans that were here when it hit. I don't know how many of them went home, but there were people that were staying in hotels and hostels, and they ran out of money. And the hotels and hostels would say, there were some cases where they'd say, "You're foreign people brought the virus, get out of here." And there'd be people like shivering in the rain, like, "What do we do?" And then there were other places where they would say, "Stay as long as you need to, don't worry about paying us." And
that's unbelievable.
Yeah. But I was in that position where I had to keep renewing my visa. And so we were like, we need to get the ball moving on my becoming like, a partial citizen, or what they call an overseas citizen, which we're actually today, we're going to be leaving for Goa like a few days before it'll be time to go pick it up. And so we're going to be telling them, "Hey, we'll be back in a week and a half, just hang on to it." And then I'm going to come back, and I'm already planning to go in front of India Gate, the one that looks like the l'Arc de Triomphe, just to like pose with it's like an Indian passport for either foreigners married to Indian citizens or Indians who have gotten citizenship outside of India. So that's why it's overseas citizen of India. So yeah, it's the closest you can get to being a citizen without renouncing the citizenship of your country of origin, which I don't know if I'll ever do, because I've got a lot of things still going on in the astral with my bank and stuff. But anyway, so yeah, okay, backtracking a little. Yeah, so we did a formal marriage, which involved they're like, "So do you renounce Christ and Christianity and the religion of your birth, and you accept Hinduism?" I should mention that it's not required for a person to become Hindu to marry a Hindu in India, but it's simple. It's much simpler than there's like a law, there's a precedent that was established like, I don't know, 70 years ago that allows for interfaith marriages you invoke there's a certain right under this act of this, but like, rather than go through all that, I didn't mind, signing the thing saying, yeah, I'm not a Christian anymore, I'm Hindu now. And in my mind, I talked to my dad's old friend Kess about it, and he was saying that there's precedent there's forms of Hinduism that accept Yeshua as a god, or as kind of part of the pantheon of Hinduism, if you will.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, basically, Sri Ramakrishna, that's
Mm,
basically the precedent was he was a Hindu who converted to Islam and attained
mm,
enlightenment, then became Christian and found enlightenment in that path, and became Jewish, found enlightenment in that path. I'm probably not
mm,
telling 100% accurate the story, and then came back to Hinduism and attained enlightenment on that path. And then, so his whole kind of message and, thing was that it's not about the vehicle,
mm.
the form of the religion. It all leads to the same mukti, the same liberation. And
I see.
not everybody believes that. I was going to get into a little bit of like how Osirification is the ultimate goal of the Golden Dawn tradition.
Hmm.
I think that I join with a Buddhist bias.
Hmm.
I saw a cognitive bias, so I was seeing the two pillars and reconciling between them, the middle way, and then a bunch of
Mm,
crosses. Okay, let's ignore those crosses. Actually, I was like, what's with all the crosses? And they had this thing back then where they didn't reveal how Christian everybody was in the inner order. And
mm.
people weren't that Christian in the inner order back then. I mentioned that the cult leader went through phases, so he wasn't in
Sure.
his hardcore Catholic phase at that time. But
But
anyway,
even back then, you always had this plan of retiring to
eventually, yeah,
another path anyway,
yeah.
for
That
your
was the
upbringing.
idea. But then kind of I got gradually indoctrinated, and I don't know. I basically the way things were under the leader was you never leave. You if you leave, you become one of the fallen.
Mm,
And yeah, to get back into that, um, I was there. I was going through the motions. But at the same time, I was also noticing, and people were pointing out, there was a yoga teacher that was living with a roommate, of mine, and she was pointing out that when she was growing up, she was Catholic,
mm.
and people would go to church and be very holy and act holy, and then they would go to IHOP and eat a huge stack of pancakes, and
Right,
then talk crap about the other people in the church, and
right.
and she was kind of mainly focusing on how there was like no consideration toward the body, that
Mm,
she had become a yoga teacher
hmm.
because moving away from that. And so I had her come and teach at the temple, and I called it
Okay.
Golden Dawn Yoga, and I was calling it, instead of downward dog, it was Anubis pose, and it was very
Mm,
silly. But we did that for a while on Monday nights. and
mm.
um and so then I was like, we had a schism, a bad one. We had a few, but this one was big. It was we had temples all around the world, and all of the other temples except for the main temple where it all started were all banding together to go leave and start their own thing. And I
Mm,
was behind them leaving. I loved them.
mm.
I thought that they should get as far away from the asshole that was in charge as
Yeah.
possible. But then, when it was all going down, my students would call me and say, are you going or are you staying? I'd say, I'm staying, but you should go. So that was like, break 150 hearts in a row. So it was rough. So it was already rough. Like I mentioned, I wasn't that interested in occult books, but you can imagine going from not being that interested in occult books to just not wanting to fucking think about it at all. I would get as
Yeah.
high as
Yeah.
possible and watch Battlestar Galactica, and that was when that time period, 2011, and the newer one.
From my perspective, hearing the story though, it's almost like something was pushing you out of there,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
And I had
And
been
you,
kind of
it's
like,
like you had to go on this next phase of your life
right,
to where you
right.
are now in India, studying yoga,
Yeah,
studying
yeah.
Buddhism, studying all of this stuff that you had known you were going to study eventually, but
Eventually, yeah.
it's almost like
So,
your higher genius was like, okay, it's time to go now.
yeah,
You don't really have a
yeah.
choice.
So when the schism was
It's
happening,
fascinating.
right in the thick of it, people yelling at we at first when smartphones came out, we were like, this is so great. I get emails wherever I am. Like it just my phone vibrates and there's the email. I don't have to go home and log onto the computer. And we didn't know yet that that is a bad thing. That is
Yeah,
not a good thing
yeah,
because you cannot get away from the drama,
right,
and
right.
so when I was on the subway, we had a subway in LA, just of one, but the purple line or the red line. And
Mm,
so I would read Shobogenzo, Dogen's Shobogenzo, the Zen master from the 1300s. And
mm,
so I was reading that while I was listening to Tibetan chants. And then,
mm,
I would like sit and meditate. And so I really got into, I read all 4 volumes and I love those books. And he talks about lotus position a lot. Like it's
mm,
Zen, so of course they sit in lotus
mm,
position. So he was emphasizing the importance that lotus position is the Buddha mind seal. When you put your
mm.
body into that position, your mind becomes the mind of the Buddha. And it was like, holy crap, And so I thought I need to get into yoga because I cannot for the life of me get my body to go into lotus position.
Right,
And
I was gonna say for myself, my hips don't turn that way. I
yeah,
can't get my
exactly.
legs to cross.
Exactly. And he would say, if you can't do it, you can do half lotus. And I'll send you a video that I used. I would do
Please.
this particular exercise daily and
Mm,
until I could finally do lotus position. And so
mm,
it's funny because I had a yoga teacher that was teaching me to be a teacher trainer.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
she could do so many things and balance and all these different things, but she couldn't do lotus position. And I could do lotus
Mhm.
position, but like very little else because that was my main focus was getting
Yeah.
into yoga was just
Yeah.
specifically on my hips and that kind of thing. And because I wanted to meditate properly.
Mm,
And so then in 2013, I mentioned that I stayed with the California temple that was still with the cult leader, and
mm,
everybody else left and started a new order. And so
mm,
finally in 2013, the guy who was my immediate teacher, who insisted on being fucking loyal to the cult leader, up
mm,
until that point, finally said, okay, I've finally had enough. We're going to become an independent temple and
mm,
no longer be affiliated with him. And so I was like, this is great. And
mm.
then so I was like, things are going to start getting better. And then we went and saw the Dalai Lama speak, as a temple, as the inner order. And I was
Oh,
like, this is so cool. But then like we all went out to coffee one day and they started talking crap about these 2 dear friends of mine who had been
mm,
in portal for years, who
mm,
just all they wanted was to be recognized and accepted into the second order.
mm.
And so like we were down to a group of 6 because the other 20
Yeah.
had left to start a new order. And this
Yeah.
group of 6, I was one of them, or 5 or something. And the others were all laughing about the arrogance of these 2 portals to presume that they should be invited into
Mm,
our little group of idiots.
mm.
And I got mad and I stood up and left. And
Yeah.
but then I showed up the next day and did I wasn't leaving the order, I was just leaving the room.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then there was people started to hear that we had become unaffiliated with the cult leader, so they started wanting to come back because they had
Mm,
left because of an issue with him. So there was in
yeah.
particular this one woman, an older woman who used to be a nun, and hi Mary, and so she was coming back. So Ramsey was saying, he's the leader of the temple, was saying we need to start having mandatory meetings again on Sunday because
Mm,
we need to be serious again because we had stopped doing
yeah.
that. They did that since forever, but then like
Yes.
it kind of become lax and I would be like, yeah, I'm not going to make it. And it was like, fine. And but then they were like, we're going to start having meetings every Sunday and they're mandatory. And I'm like, okay, well, have fun. I won't be there. And
Mm-hmm.
he was like, well, you need to be there because you're the second most senior person in the order, and you
Mm-hmm.
need to be an example. And I was like, well, that's frankly more of a you problem, not so much a me problem, you know?
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
I don't, however you want to deal with that is up to you, but I'm not going to be
Yep.
here, you know, like I'm
Right.
fucking sick of it, you know, like,
Yep.
no, you know?
Yep.
And so he was like, well, do you want to leave? And I was like, I can leave, you know, like, because I mean, I was like that the elephant that got tied up by an iron chain when it was a baby, and then so a rope could hold it when it was an adult. I just had never even considered the possibility of leaving. Like
Mm-hmm.
I was indoctrinated as a teenager, and I just got fully into the whole thing of like, you know, stay forever, no matter which of
Yes.
your friends leaves and becomes one of the fallen, you know, you stay and stick with it, stick the course, stay the
Mm-hmm.
course toward where it doesn't matter, you know, like just keep going. And so I was like, I can leave. He was like, of course you can leave. You're a person, you have free will, you know, and I was like, I would love to leave. And he was like, well, now think about it. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'd like to leave now, please, you know. And it happened to be, we were having this conversation like a few minutes before the equinox ceremony, spring
What
equinox of
year was this now?
2013.
2013.
And as part of the ceremony,
Mm-hmm.
someone got up and made an announcement that BT will be moving on to the next stage of his adepthood, and he will still be with us in spirit, but we won't be seeing him here at the temple anymore. And I was premonstrator, and so I took off my robe and gave it to a dear friend of mine, and he took over the position and sat in the throne, and I stood up and I thanked everybody, and I gave this little speech just sort of off the
Mm-hmm.
top of my head, and I thanked Ramsey and thanked everybody, and said,
Yeah.
these have been some really good years, these 18 and a half years, and all
Yes.
right, and
It's a
then
long time
I
to be with a group
left.
of people.
I just left, and I never went back. And
But you're still in good terms with this group, right? Like the people
yeah,
there, you're still in contact.
yeah. And
That's a beautiful thing.
I remained in good contact with the group that left in 2011, and I'm in good contact with the group that I left in 2013.
Because I've
Um,
seen groups, doesn't matter what tradition they're in, but when people leave, the group that's
yeah,
still operating sometimes take it personal and they
yeah,
treat the person as if they've died. Doesn't matter if
mhm,
they were their best friends, they just
yeah,
cut off contact with the person, and anytime the name comes up, it's
exactly.
almost like as if
That's
you're
how we
remembering somebody
were.
who passed away.
That's
Yeah.
how we were, like circa 1990s up until, I don't know, into the teens, or up to 2011, or at least up into the aughts somewhere.
Mhm.
When I got into a position of authority, I started like being buddies with the cult leader, kind of like so I could get things done.
Sure,
And so
sure.
I got him to allow, because we had a rule that you couldn't be a member of the OTO and join the Golden Dawn, and I got him to get rid of that rule. So
Mm-hmm.
for this couple that wanted to join, and anyway,
Yeah,
so
because
things
OTO
like
doesn't
that.
offer they don't offer magical training. They have
Yeah,
their mass that they do, but and you'll learn stuff there, but their goal is not to teach you how to cast a circle and do the LBRP. It's
right.
like if you want to do that, you need to do that on your own, or you need
Yeah,
to find a group that teaches that. They don't have
exactly.
teaching, magical teaching.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a beautiful thing.
So I think after I left, I think I got addicted to quitting things. So I left, and shortly afterward, I quit my job, and shortly
Mm.
afterward, I got divorced.
Oh my
And
goodness.
then I told my sister, like, hey, we need to sell the house. And then I left California. So but it was like it was like a champagne bottle that you shake up for like 2
Mm.
years, and then the cork flies off and it goes flying. So
Complete
for 18 and a
upheaval.
half years, I was like in a 40-hour-a-week job in the entertainment industry, and not that happy in my previous, situation,
Mm.
and then locked into this order, and then so like crack, crack,
Just
crack,
all
crack,
at
crack,
once.
crack. And then I'm in Nepal, and so it was a
Well,
very
how
beautiful
many
thing.
how many years have you been out there now in Asia?
Well, I left California shortly after our last conversation in 2017, and I went to Africa first, and I spent some time in the north, the kind of the north border of South Africa near Zimbabwe, at the Gnostic Church of the Black Sun Kuhoyu. No
I remember
relation with the
seeing images. Yes.
Siddhartha K is a very interesting person with a lot of background in everything from Buddhism to Masonry, and he was on Scientology staff, but he got thrown out because he had this epiphany that he wanted to start sort of a Pan-African, like a traditional African core, but to include Buddhism and Hermeticism and Nordic teachings and all of these other things, in the spirit of knowing that all of these traditions came ultimately from Africa, since the humans that developed these traditions, their ancestors came from Africa. So it's kind of like a new approach toward a Pan-Africanism that includes the whole world.
Interesting.
So
Interesting. Yeah. But
it's
that
an
they didn't
interesting
take that
cat.
in Scientology.
No, they weren't into that. Yeah, they manipulated. They told his wife that she had to divorce him if he wouldn't stop, and horrible stuff. But so he has no love for that organization, but he understands the lingo. And from my years of hanging out at Gordon's at 2 a.m. just about every night, talking, talking in that same lingo, it's very interesting to go down to South Africa and talk to somebody, with kind of a voodoo base to his, practices about speaking in Hubbard speak about Buddhism and Golden Dawn, so it's a unique kind of thing,
It was
rare to
interesting
find.
when I saw you upload the photos in Africa with Siddhartha K. I know over the years in OTO, there's been so many people wanting to have some type of hermetic occultism in various parts of Africa, and it's almost like a dry land that maybe South Africa every so often has something, but there's very little Western European
It's an uphill
occultism.
battle. He's a very motivated person, so he's staying at it, even though it's not, it's rough, to get it going, but he's been at it for many years. And so he's got little groups in like Congo and South Africa and a few other places, and some members in France and a few other places. So
yeah, that makes me happy that things are going on over there.
So after that, I went to Nepal because I wanted to begin my Buddhism period in life. And so the very first place I wanted to go was the birthplace of Lord Buddha, which is in Lumini, Nepal. And so but I wasn't in a hurry, I mean, because it seemed very non-Buddhist to be in a hurry to go on my Buddhist pilgrimage. You know what I mean? Like, for example, I've got all these books. The top shelf here and the part of the second shelf are all the old pre-Mahayana Buddhism from BC times, like the original rules, the original teachings. And so I'm slowly reading them, and I'm reading them on a channel called Buddhist Books Podcast. You can check it out right now if you'd like. It's on YouTube.
I'll put a link in the description below. No, by all means.
But I'm going through it very slowly.
Of the videos.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
But I'm not in a rush with that either, for the same reasons, because I like, part of me, there's some chattering monkey that says, well, hey, do the math, are you going to live long enough to finish this project? And so I'm like, my response is, like, maybe not, I don't know, but I'm not attached to the result, basically.
There you go.
I consider it a mitzvah. I think it's a good act to make the teachings of original pre-Mahayana Buddhism available to people who are interested in it, because the Buddhism that is mostly popular in the West I think, I mean, maybe not most, but it seems like more than half of the people that are interested would call themselves a person interested in Buddhism in the West are interested in Vajrayana Buddhism, which is the one that's very colorful. I'm also interested in Vajrayana Buddhism. My dad was also interested in Vajrayana Buddhism, the Tantric Buddhism. But I think that people are more interested in the Tantric and less interested in the Buddhism. And I'm the other way around. I'm still that little boy that wanted to find the purest order to become the on the right path, toward Yeshua or whatever, at
Well,
heart. And
people
so,
hear Tantra, at least where I
right,
am. I've
they
seen
think
it. They hear
sex.
Tantra, they
Yeah,
think
yeah,
sex. I
yeah.
posted one video on my channel about sex magic, and that instantly got like a couple hundred clicks, almost
Yeah,
clickbaity, you know.
of course,
Um,
because we come from a Puritan, ancestry. Like we're post Protestants. Like our ancestors were Protestants for the most part. I mean, so we're very repressed, and so the idea of putting spiritual and sexual in the same sentence together is like,
right.
hey, that's
Yeah.
new. Like putting Batman in the Marvel movie or something. Like, what
Right.
is
Like,
doing
whoa,
over
whoa, what is
there?
happening?
Like
Yeah.
that's not normal.
Yeah.
So yeah, but like Tantra itself, I always like to emphasize and re-emphasize that there was this movement in the
Mm,
400s that was basically primarily the idea that you could have a shrine in your home and
mm,
a little bell like this and
mm,
incense and a statue of one of the gods, and you could do your prayers and you could do pujas in your
mm,
home, and you wouldn't have to be dependent on the top of the caste system, the Brahmins.
mm,
And so it was kind of a counterculture movement to
okay.
like take back some of this spiritual and religious power, sort of the equivalent of building a temple in your house and doing rituals, as opposed to always just every Sunday needing for a priest to do it for you.
Right.
Sort of like
Right.
that. And so that was Tantra that revolutionized Hinduism. Now it's
Mm,
taken for granted as a part of Hinduism,
right.
and it revolutionized Mahayana and turned it into Vajrayana. And
Mm,
uh, and then also on the side there was the sexual imagery and practices and symbolism as well.
right. Right.
And so, but that's where Westerners put the emphasis on account of the Puritan thing. But then these days in India, when people hear the word tantra, they think of the agori. So they
Yeah,
think
I
of,
was
yeah,
wasn't
like
sure whether I
eating
should bring them up,
bones and
but
stuff. Yeah,
have you met any since you've been
yeah.
out there? And what is
Um,
it like in person? Because I've only seen they fascinate me so much because it's the
yeah.
counterculture.
Well,
Um,
there's like in Jainism, there's the naked people wandering in the woods, and then there's the people who go to work on Monday and wear
mhm,
clothes.
right.
So similarly, in Agori, at least these days, there's I have a friend who's in Agori that is in IT, and he lives up
Mm,
in Punjab, and he's a good friend, and he's
mm,
familiar with Crowley and Golden Dawn as well. And my dad's book is his favorite book, and so he's my Agori friend,
okay.
and he's uses the moniker Wizard, but
Mm,
his name's Amandeep. I've interviewed him twice, I think, um, maybe three times on
mhm.
Esoteric Nerd.
I
Um,
watched one of them. I know that.
yeah, yeah. So the last one, he was when he was getting deeply into Agori, and there's an Agori like official Agori organization, and he
Mm,
met and got like blessings or empowerments or whatever from that head guy, and uh, and so he was posting pictures of like touching his feet and all this, which means receiving the knowledge and so
because towards the
I've
well,
seen the other
finish your thought.
ones.
Finish your thought, please.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't gotten very close to the ones that live in the charnel grounds or
Mm,
where they put the bodies and stuff. And
yeah.
there's ones that are kind of like street performers. I hate to put it that way. Like maybe they're sincere practitioners, but they're sincere practitioners who happen to be on the main walkway in the touristy part of Varanasi.
Taking
And
donations,
so,
kind
yeah,
of.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So it's like he's someone dressed as an Agori. You know, I mean, I'm being hypocritical. I dress as a monk, but I'm not a monk. But I, you know, when I recite the scriptures for the
Yeah.
Buddhist Books channel, I wear a formal monk's robe. But anyway, yeah. So I haven't like spent any time. Like there's that one where the reporter is sitting next to him and he says something. He's like, "What did he say?" He says, "If this white man doesn't stop talking, I'm going to cut his head off." And the
Yeah, that was
reporter's
CNN or something, right?
I haven't gotten very close to any of those sort.
Yeah.
But that, yeah, what I was.
I would think that they're a little bit excluded on purpose. Like they kind of seclude themselves.
Yeah, secluded. Yeah, like,
Yeah.
but yeah, what I was saying was that in India, the word tantra brings them to mind. In America, the
Yes.
word tantra brings, you know, like Sarah's sex magic yoga party, you know, or whatever to
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah.
But in Tibet, they understand that that their form of Buddhism is tantric Buddhism, and
Hmm.
they wouldn't like they if you go to Bhutan, one of the sacred symbols that's painted on temples is a phallus, you know. So it's
Hmm.
like it's definitely like a different attitude toward, you know, sexuality
Yeah.
than the
Yeah, it's a
conventional.
more natural thing, I would think, in
Yeah,
India. It's not shameful like it has been
yeah.
here in the
May
States.
in India, there's a little bit of you know, like keep it in your pants before marriage kind of sentiment. And you know, in traditional families, probably in Bhutan too, but Bhutan is like northeast of India, up in the
Mhm.
mountains there. So that's where they have the penises on the temples. You won't find that in India, but
I was
the
gonna say towards the beginning of the interview, you had mentioned like old ancient Hinduism yoga. They would do,
yeah.
it wasn't Agori yet, but they would do like the
Mm.
corpse pose
Oh
came
no, that
from doing
was 500
meditation.
years ago. So
Only
so
500. Oh, I thought it was much
yeah,
further back. Okay,
that
so it
that's
was
hatha
recent.
yoga. So the
Okay,
origins of hatha yoga borrowed from tantra. And
okay.
one main obvious example of that is shavasana, meaning corpse pose.
Yes.
Originally meant laying on a corpse.
And so that
And
only originated within the past 500 years.
yeah, yeah. So
Wow, I didn't know
ancient
that.
yoga predated tantra. So
Okay.
tantra hadn't come around yet.
Yes.
Um,
Okay.
but they were doing meditation toward mukti or liberation, which included the breath work, included the practice of nonviolence and no sex and no clinging,
Mhm.
and staying clean and pure and be content. Contentment is a rule. You have to be just cool about whatever's going on. Like,
Mm.
thou shalt chill. You know, can you imagine? Um,
It's nice.
and
It's nice. It's a nice
yeah,
way to be.
right. Santos,
Yeah.
it's one of the niyamas.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so um, you know, and then like they have their whole thing about you get magical powers if you like because there's enlightenment and meditation, and if you can combine enlightenment and meditation,
Mhm.
then that's samyama. And then with
Okay.
samyama, then you can make an elephant as light as a feather, or you can, you know, there's all these different things in like the third
Sure.
chapter of the Yoga Sutras where it gets into all your
Sure.
magical powers. So like modern yoga teachers in like the secular atheistic rational world sort of ignore that those later chapters and focus on
Mm.
the first
Mm.
couple chapters.
I read a book, I forget the author's name. It might be Gordon White or something like that.
Mm,
I'll send you a link afterwards if you're interested, but it was called Kiss of the Yogini,
mm,
and he it's a scholaristic work. He researches the origins of Tantra, and
mm.
I don't, to me it was a fascinating read, but I'm
Yeah.
obviously way outside the culture. I'm
Mm.
curious if you were to read it or whatever and see what kind of views you had on it, but I don't know if you
Yeah,
heard of that before,
I can
Tiszta
flip
Yogini.
through it for sure. I my reading list is like I've got a lot of books I want to read, and then I
Mhm.
never get to them. So like if I
Yeah,
were to
I
add something to
understand.
the list, it'd be post never.
Yeah,
But I can
I know.
definitely take a look. I can definitely skim through something, but I like to give a book, full attention and
Sure,
take the time that it takes to,
sure.
but yeah, I'll definitely take a look at it. But I mean, I don't claim to be an expert.
Mhm.
I kind of have a general sort of vaguish idea, and I think it's because like I mean I see at least online or am aware of people who are total experts, and so and like they say, I thought I was an expert when I was 18. I thought I knew
Mhm.
everything, and that the more I learned, the more I realize I know nothing. But
Mhm.
yeah, there's sort of an overlap in Hindu Tantra and Buddhist Tantra, and so there's elements of pre-tantric Hinduism that find their way into tantric Buddhism, and so it's I mean at that point it's like I have they're kind of separate interests. I'm interested in the philosophy of Lord Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, and the practice of Buddhism as a path and as a way. And also, I'm from a more socio-anthropological, time-traveling tourist, sort of point of view. I'm interested in the evolution of the umpteen different forms of Buddhism, and uh,
Mhm.
and all the gods, and I mean, respectfully. I mean, I hope
Sure,
that it's
sure.
possible to be respectful while at the same time say that.
Mhm.
Um, but it's like I don't worship any of the Vajrayana Buddhist gods, and I don't think that Lord Buddha would have either. But I don't want to offend people who do worship them. You know what I mean?
Sure, sure.
And I mean, but I have a relationship with some of them. But like my
Mhm.
dad said in Transformations, some call them saints and devils and gods. I call them friends.
Mhm.
Like you
Mhm.
don't need to worship someone just because they're in a position of authority, whether that be a god or a guru.
Right.
But that's maybe my American, bias of
It could
not
be.
wanting
I
to pay
understand what you mean,
obeisance
though.
to the
It's like
king.
when I work with a deity, there's an aspect where, let's say I'm invoking Tahuti or something, it's not necessarily I feel like I'm worshiping him. I'm kind of bringing him in because I get something out of that relationship and he gets something out of that relationship. And after a while, you grow close, and it's kind of like you know this deity if you've worked with them for a long
Yeah,
period of time. But I start to take on some of those qualities if it's a continuous
yeah.
flow of working with it and become
And when
more
you
like
open
it in
your
certain
heart
ways.
to something like Thoth with the invocation of Thoth, I think we do the same invocation of Thoth. When you really open up to that and let the God inside, I think what you're doing is more like true worship than most of the people who are bowing down to a statue of somebody
Mm-hmm.
and kind of like you thinking that they worship something or insisting that
Yeah.
they worship it. So it's, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that the English word worship, because English was a Christian language originally, the word worship means either you're worshiping the one true and holy God, or you're worshiping a false idol or a false god or something terrible, or the
Right.
devil, So that's the
Right.
meaning of the English word worship. So it sounds weird to the ear to
Mm.
say worshiping Shiva or worshiping Kali or worshiping, this or that bodhisattva
Right.
or something. It
Exactly.
just doesn't hit the ear right.
Yeah.
But
Interesting. It's interesting.
yeah,
So, where are you at now in terms of like, are you working solitary? Do you have a teacher or a temple that you attend, or what does that
I
look like?
got burned out on cults.
Yeah.
So my the people that I've spoken to in Vajrayana, monks and such, they all have the same advice, which is become a master of the Theravadan scriptures, the Theravadan, the teachings of Lord Buddha. And then, if you want to, you can learn the Mahayana Sutras. And then, after you've done all of that, if there's still time, then you can learn the Vajrayana as well. And so that's kind of my trajectory, my what's the word when you have a travel plan, my itinerary, and I'm
like
taking my
list.
time at it because I'm not in any rush. I took 18 and a half years with the Golden Dawn, so I don't I'm not in a hurry. I don't need to get to Vajrayana in a year. I can get to it in 20 years. That's fine. So I'm slowly absorbing and being honest about my experience of learning Theravada. And, like there's things that people used to say before 1960 that are kind of like hit wrongly. They don't sound good to our ear today. And so I kind of have to slowly tread through hearing these things come out of Lord Buddha's mouth, because it's disappointing, because I wanted him to be perfect. And so I have to like take the time and meditate and reflect on the fact that the Buddha isn't perfect or wasn't. Maybe he deserves our respect for introducing the way, or at least learning the way and saying, yes, that, but you can have rice too. Whatever it was that he did, like I can pay that much respect to him. And I can start to forgive other male chauvinists, maybe even the cult leader that I had so much negative experience with, because if I'm going to forgive Lord Buddha for being a shit, then there's a lot of people I have to forgive. So it's a long, and I don't want to say tedious, but it's an intricate process because I don't, it's personal. It's not like I don't, and because I have no teacher, I have nobody to show my report to, or to get a grade from, or to try to impress, or try to convince that I'm absorbing it. I have no one but myself. And so if I hit a stumbling block, then I've got to hang out with that stumbling block. And to every once in a while stop and consider the fact that maybe I don't want to be on that path. Maybe it's not the path for me. And consider and reconsider. Is my goal mukti at all? Or am I fully intending to reincarnate another 100,000 times? There's a lot of questions about that, But just to wrap up, because I think we've been talking forever. Just to wrap up with the story, not the whole conversation. In 2011, when the schism was happening, I got into the Buddhism and then the yoga, and then left the order in 2013. And no, I guess I did finish the story, didn't I? I became a yoga teacher, just kind of, I think, to fill, because I was used to standing up and telling everybody lay down and shut up and do what I say. I'm going to do a guided path working. And so after I left the order, it only seemed natural to become a yoga instructor, partly because I thought that I could find a sense of community in the New Age, spiritual community of Southern California in general. And I didn't fit in, I just couldn't play along. Like, they all seem to have these unspoken or spoken agreements and dogmas, and ways of perceiving things. For one thing, at least in Southern California, that community is kind of female dominated, and I don't want to play the poor white cishet white male guy, but I just don't think I really fit in, and I felt like I had, if I even mentioned my background in history, people would slowly back away. So that was part of it. It has nothing to do with my gender or anything like that. But I felt that my experience kind of gave me a certain insight and that I could understand nuances and things in yoga and in Buddhism, from having been raised by a Buddhist, and and so I mean, it was like I wasn't being recognized. I was sort of being treated as a, yeah, you're interesting. Everybody's a special flower. Now go over there, and so I think that kind of helped add fuel to the fire of my wanting to come to this part of the world and kind of get the firsthand. So in the end, I had been wanting to come to India anyway, and I had the opportunity. When I was in Nepal, there was this sort of event where late at night, I had this kind of half awake, half asleep, like vision of Vajrayogini, the Tibetan Tantric goddess who had an Indian origin, according to the story. And she had said, "Come to India, we love you here." And so I got the feeling that meant that, I don't know, Indian gods were watching me, aware that I was there, aware that I was intending to come to India, and aware of how much love I've always had for the spiritual traditions and paths and everything about kind of that spiritual side of India. And so I did, and I came across the border, and she and I were friends on Facebook. She had these intense eyes, like Ocho, and she would post, like, "I am so sick of the way that people treat me," and like she was very like actively awake, you know what I mean? Like she wasn't happy with her life situation, with her circumstances. And she would say, my friends are treating me like this, her ex treating her like this, her family treating her like this. She has no one. And so then I'm like very shyly like writing to her on Facebook saying, "I know I'm a total stranger in a foreign land, but I just want you to know that you inspire me." Just that. And then, like not saying anything more because I don't want to be one of those creeps on the internet, and apparently that was a good move, like, yeah, I don't want to be like, "Okay, so what you doing?" Like just sort of leave it at that. Conversation over. And then, so then several months later saying, "Hey, I'm going to be in Delhi for a few days, and I have 3 people that I want to meet while I'm there. Would you be interested in being number 4? And then, so I said, let's meet for coffee. And so I had been in India for like less than a week. And I was planning to meet her for coffee at Cafe Coffee Day, which is like Starbucks here. They have Starbucks here, but it's a fancy thing. Cafe Coffee Day is the actual equivalent of Starbucks here, but it's an Indian company. But Starbucks is a fancy American company that, fancy people go and pay way too much for their coffee and sit with their laptops. They're, it's like a whole thing. They have glasses, they give you your coffee in a glass.
Really? At Starbucks there?
Different.
Wow.
Yeah. They teamed up. It's Tata Starbucks, but Tata is very small. Tata is the big company here. Anyway, so they have a halfers. In order for Starbucks to be allowed to do business in India, they went halfers. So an Indian company gets half of the profit, and then Seattle gets the other half. So we met, and she took me to the ISKCON, the Hare Krishna temple, on our first date, and our first meeting. It wasn't really a date, and she was dressed in traditional, garb and everything, and then we just got along so well, and I felt like it was like a continuation of the conversation with the goddess in Nepal. It was a confirmation. It was like it was one of those things where it was like one of those synchronicities where I wasn't surprised, where I was like, she was so welcoming and we got along so well. And her background, she was an odd bird in India and I was an odd bird in America. And she had a background in a lot of, Eastern esoterica, but had interest in Western things. And I had a background in Western esoterica and had interest in, Eastern things. And there were some things that like profound, like other world and, spiritual ideas that we both agreed on that most people don't. And, and so we got along on that level. And then then shortly afterward, you know, I was feeling an attraction, and I thought that, you know, I should check in with her in a few years and see if she's still single, because you know, I think she could be the one. And then this woman that I was staying at a friend's house. I mean, I met this guy that took me into his home, and his mother sent me a message on WhatsApp out of the blue. She didn't speak English very well, and she wrote, "The right decision at the wrong time is the wrong decision." And I was like,
Wow.
so I swiped away from that chat and pulled up the chat with her and told her I was in love with her.
Oh my goodness. But it obviously worked out perfect. I mean,
I said it. I think I might be falling in love with you a little bit. I hope that's okay.
yeah.
Taj Mahal after that, and then we were in a relationship, you know, at that point. And
I think it's so beautiful. I mean, you had this just the way that this conversation went. It's like you had these goals from pretty much childhood of I'm gonna get into this type of magic. I'm gonna close that chapter of my life, and I want to study I don't like saying Eastern, but I'll say
me neither. Yeah.
right.
Just
Like it's kind
for
of
convenience sake. Yeah.
right because it's multiple religion. I could go through the list, but
Right.
Buddhism
Of
and
course.
yoga, Hinduism, etc. And
Yeah.
so the second that there was this big upheaval and all of those chapters one by one just closed, you went on to that next phase of
I
life,
knew what
and
it
then
was
just
time for. Yeah.
right, and then
Yeah.
love came in, the vision, like yeah, it's just such a complete fascinating. Like I don't know, it's just
Yeah.
fascinating. Just everything was so complete.
Yeah, and it allowed for me to, it's like I was in love with India before she and I met, but you know, but this allows for me to stay here, to establish roots here, to not be renewing my visa, jumping over to Nepal every 6 months, but when I get that OCI in a week or two, I can work here, I can own property here, you know, like I have all the rights of a citizen, except I can't vote. I don't care about voting. You know, like, I mean, I have my opinions about the politics here, but I don't need to be one of 1.4 billion people deciding who gets to be what, you know. So it's okay. Yeah, I don't mind that. So yeah, it has a happy ending. Touch wood. Here they say touch wood instead of knock on wood.
I'm doing that now. I got a wood table.
Yeah.
I guess the last question,
Yeah.
being a person that interviews magical people as often as you have, how was it being on the other side? I don't know if you've done interviews like this before, podcasts.
Oh, it's fun. I'm a total egomaniac, so I love talking about myself, you know, and having somebody interested in hearing it all, you know. So we usually, when I'm the host and I spend half the episode talking about myself, then part of me feels like guilty, like I'm doing something wrong, you know, like they say that the worst kinds of podcasters are the ones that dominate the conversation, and, you know, make it all about themselves, you know. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I'm the worst kind of podcaster then, aren't I? So it was nice to be alleviated of that feeling of shame. No, it's definitely fun. I mean, I think, yeah, from my experience of talking to so many people, I'm enjoying being on the other side of the conversation, you know, and being the guest, and you're a very gracious host, and
thank you. I was gonna ask, so hopefully
absolutely. No, it was great. Yeah, it was great. And so yeah. And I think that's pretty much everything. And we're running out of time, so I can't really launch into another subject. But I occasionally, is that the Tanakh? No, it's a different black book with gold writing on it on the top
Which
shelf.
one? On the top shelf.
Yeah.
Here?
Above on the right.
That way?
The other right. The black.
No, that's John Dee. John Dee, a faithful relation.
Okay.
True and faithful relation.
Yeah, I do requiems when someone that I was a second order brother with passes away. I do the Golden Dawn Requiem usually, and occasionally I'll do some of that You know, actually, some of the channeled second order, you know, like high healing work, Yeshua centered, vault sort of centered, I'll do that occasionally, especially if somebody needs healing. And you know, if somebody asks me for healing, then I'll do that, bring out all the stops, and I enjoy doing that. And I can send you a link to a video where I do that. You've probably seen it. You've probably seen me do that on those old live streams.
I've seen a few of them, but I'm not sure on a couple of them what the necessary intention was. It's
Right.
been a while now, but send me a
Yeah.
link. I'd be glad to watch it.
Sure. Yeah.
And also, if you want to, just before we end, plug your channels. I know that you have a couple of
Yeah,
YouTube
sure.
and everything.
Well, real quick, I wrote this book called Thomas and the Wolf. You've all heard the story of the llama who goes out to find the other llama who's reincarnated as a 3-year-old, but this brings that into our world and into the West, where the father, it's a father and son story, where the father has reincarnated as a 20-something-year-old leftist YouTuber, and his son is an older man, you know, who happens to be the QAnon shaman. So,
Wow.
then the hilarity ensues, you know. And so then there's Taco, which is the name of my first poetry anthology. There's E Burrito. Oh, that must have been loud. There's E Burrito, the name of my second poetry anthology. So they go together, of course, Taco E Burrito. And I wrote a computer program in BASIC when I was a teenager that writes sonnets. The poem, the program writes sonnets with lines like, as a tooth stirs a giraffe with the scene. And so if you want thousands and thousands of poems written by, obviously that's my program. If you've seen Tron, then that's obvious that that's what my program looks like, because programs, you know, have a piece of our soul in them. And then, of course, there's the DNA alphabet by Very Honored Frater BT.
Yes.
As of now, it's the only book I've published with the name Very Honored Frater BT. And something I developed in 1996 that I just decided in last year to publish. I've published a few short story compilations, The Small Gray Mouse, Smaller Mouse, and there's a lot of stories in here that take place in the universe, in a certain universe called the New World Empire universe, and the interdimensional coffee house universe. So what I did was I took all of my old notes from the New World Empire and the interdimensional coffee house, except for the stories that are in the mouse books, and I compiled them all together into the multiverse cartographer. So the multiverse cartographer won't make 100% of sense without reading the mouse books first. So this is a trilogy. And so then I decided to go ahead and put all 3 books together with a special 4th bonus section. And that book is called The New World Empire of the Interdimensional Coffee House. And it consists of the mouse books and the multiverse cartographer and a special 4th section. And that's all my books. My dad's book is called Transformations. He wrote it in 1976, and it's very lovely. Pope Runyon gave it a really nice review. And my channels, there's Gwydion's Astral Coffee House, which is the oldest one and the dearest to my heart and the least popular and the most weird. And then there's the Edward Reib YouTube channel, which these days is my travel videos. So you can see me go to Africa, you can see me go to Nepal, Bhutan, and there's book recitals on that channel. There's also the Esoteric Nerd Podcast YouTube channel. You can listen to it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or you can watch it on YouTube. There's Buddhist Books Podcast. If you go to YouTube and type in Buddhist Books Podcast, you'll find that. Again, YouTube, you can also hear that on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And there's a few things I'm forgetting. There's Goin', G-O-I-N apostrophe G-O-A-N, about the year and a half that we were in Goa. And whenever we go to Goa, like I'm going to be going to Goa next week, in a few days. I add more videos to the Goan channel. So it's all just Goa, usually just no sound except for the sounds of nature and, you know, just pictures of tropical and beach and churches and all things Goan,
Right.
except for the parties. I'm not really into the Goan party scene. And I think I'm forgetting a few things, but yeah, that's everything I have to plug.
Got it. So,
Write it down real quick.
just send me links, and
Sure,
I'll link
yeah.
myself the YouTube channels. It'll all be in the description below.
All right.
Thank you so much for coming on, doing this.
Absolutely,
This was a
thank you, and
blast.
it was an honor to
conversation.
be the first guest on your YouTube channel. I've seen parts of 3 of your channel. There's that old one where you're walking around reevaluating what your YouTube channel is going to be like. There's the analysis of the Garden of Eden, which I found very poignant, and I like, you know, some of the things you pointed out about how, you know, people may be well-meaning when they make Lilith their feminist hero, but maybe that's not the best archetype to be invoking, and things like that. And it was very interesting, the story about how Crowley became Magister Templi. I mean, I've heard reference made to, but I liked the way that you laid it all out very clearly. It's very interesting.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Wish you nothing but the best. So to everybody listening,
Likewise.
Cheers. I hope to see you all in the next one. I hope you enjoyed this. Take care, Frater.
Namaste.
Namaste. And to everybody, love is the law, love under will. Cheers. Talk soon.
Cheers.
Take care.
Bye. Okay, you too.